Life isn't solo mode, it's multiplayer. You sit down at your desk with your coffee, your task list, and a plan. For a moment, it feels like it's just you and your work. Then the phone buzzes, a message slides across the screen, or a notification blinks. That focus session you staged for yourself instantly becomes shared space. You didn't invite anyone in, but they're already making moves that intersect with yours. This is the first truth about productivity. It's never truly solo. Every vibration comes from someone else's choice. Every message dropped into your inbox hours earlier pulls you back in at the exact wrong second. Even the workspace that feels personal is more like a common board where dozens of other players leave pieces behind, each one expecting you to react. It's natural to think of lost focus as a personal failure, but that frame is incomplete. Imagine judging traffic jams as proof that every individual driver lacks discipline. That wouldn't make sense, because congestion is about collective patterns, not laziness. Productivity follows the same logic. Your attention collides with teammates, managers, friends, and even with engineers you'll never meet designing tools that compete for your time. The challenge is that most people don't recognize this multiplayer structure. They assume every slip comes from personal weakness and try to willpower their way through. But what's happening isn't simply self-control slipping. It's a constant overlap of shared triggers. That Slack ping multiplies into threads of reactive replies. That one late-night message loops into an entire chain of expectation the next morning. You're not failing alone. You're reacting inside a structure designed with many players moving at once. And the system shaping those moves isn't just human. Platforms track hundreds of signals to shape what you see. Algorithms collect hundreds of data points per user, often in their very first sessions, and they adapt at stunning speeds. For instance, researchers show feeds can update priorities after a pause of only 2 seconds. These systems aren't neutral. They embed your behavior into a network where millions of other users are training the same machine, and the results flow back into your own daily choices. That may sound overwhelming, but it's not about losing control. It's about changing perspective. If life is multiplayer, the goal isn't blaming yourself harder. It's learning how to play strategically inside the shared map. Less blame, more strategy. When you answer a message mid-task, you're not just reacting, you're reinforcing a loop of expectation. When you mute a notification, you're not being rude, you're blocking a ripple that might waste hours across the group. Seeing these interactions as linked choices makes every move more deliberate. Think about your last attempt to stay focused. Even if no one sat down beside you, the manager waiting for an update, the colleague marking a file urgent, or the friend nudging you into an afternoon chat was still present in the room through their influence. Every second of decision-making, respond now or later, ignore or open, is already multiplayer time. This shift in framing changes everything. Once you see productivity as a shared game, you stop criticizing yourself for every lapse. Instead, the workday becomes a board with rules and strategies. You wouldn't play a game blindfolded, but most people approach daily work that way, assuming silence, then stumbling into interruption after interruption. Recognizing the multiplayer structure doesn't solve everything, but it turns chaotic distraction into a pattern you can anticipate and adjust to. That means choices start to carry new weight. A quick one-line reply isn't neutral. It ripples across coworkers' calendars. Choosing not to check an alert isn't negligence. It's a protective move that redirects attention. When you see the board clearly, even small pivots shift dynamics in ways that ripple back with more time and space later. And it goes beyond the office. That casual late text to a friend might seem harmless, but it pulls them into an immediate cycle of attention that reshapes their night. That third suggested video isn't random. It's an outcome of thousands of other people's pauses and clicks feeding into the same recommendation stream. Individual focus falters not because we're weak, but because overlapping networks keep inserting competing signals. Some people hear this and feel powerless, but you don't need to control every piece on the board. You only need to see the game for what it is. Once you know you're part of a shared mesh of actions, you can start aligning to it with purpose. That shift doesn't require perfection. It just reframes every decision from guilt into strategy. The reward is practical clarity. Treating productivity as multiplayer turns interruptions into puzzles instead of moral failings. Muting a channel becomes a tactical adjustment. batching responses becomes a conscious reshaping of the board. Even a deliberate pause before acting changes the rhythm for others, and that pattern accumulates into hours saved, not just for you, but across your network. Life multiplies efficiency when players adjust the rules. The comfort is that you're not locked in a duel against the clock. You're navigating a shared landscape where moves can be smarter, steadier, and more intentional once you stop pretending it's just you on the board. And the moment you notice this, you're primed to see how even the tiniest ripple, like a single ping, can spread across an entire team in seconds. That's where the next layer of the game really begins. The distraction equilibrium. The distraction equilibrium begins with something deceptively small. A single ping, say one Slack message appears, and within moments half the team is leaning over their phones or flicking to another tab. One person reads it, another fires back a response, someone else drops in an emoji reaction, and suddenly a whole thread of replies snowballs from what was meant to be one quick update. No one intended to stop working, but they all did. Viewed across a whole workday, this ripple isn't minor. It's a synchronized pause that drains momentum while looking, on the surface, like collaboration. What makes it more insidious is that every participant believes their own decision was reasonable. Taking 10 seconds to glance down, sending a short "got it?" That seems harmless. But the real cost doesn't sit in the seconds, it resides in what comes after. Research shows it can take on average 23 minutes to fully recover focus after a notification-driven interruption. A few quick replies actually fracture hours of concentration when multiplied across an entire group. This is why distractions feel light individually, but grow heavy collectively. And this is where game theory clarifies what's happening. Individually rational moves create a system-wide trap. Think about the logic. If you're in a project thread, the best move in isolation seems to be check fast, respond fast, stay visible, keep things moving. But when everyone applies that same strategy, the rhythm of work splinters into dozens of tiny breaks. No single person improves the situation by stepping out, because doing so alone risks being seen as unresponsive or careless. That's the essence of the distraction equilibrium. It stabilizes not because it's effective, but because no player can escape it individually without incurring a penalty. You see this far beyond office chats. A midnight group message lights up 4 friends' phones, pulling each of them into the exchange at a time when they should be sleeping. Social feeds do the same at a much bigger scale, millions of users glancing down for just a second, which in practice means millions of people splitting their attention into fragments, and those fragments add up. Sustained attention takes longer to rebuild than to break, so every app vibration chips away at depth in a way no quick glance truly avoids. Game theory refers to this as a Nash equilibrium, conditions where everyone's current choice seems best, but the collective outcome is worse. In an office setting, someone who checks notifications immediately avoids the risk of looking unreliable. Yet, if everyone responds instantly, the system creates permanent disruption. Individuals remain trapped because changing alone makes their situation worse. They'd risk exclusion while gaining no efficiency back. The danger of this equilibrium is that it presents itself as professionalism. People think, I don't want to hold others up, so I'll just reply quickly. Multiply that belief by a team, and you get environments where responsiveness outruns actual creation. Meetings produce endless status updates, messages multiply mid-task, and the deep work projects that define progress remain perpetually unfinished. Consider the mental effect. Studies show the average person checks their phone nearly 100 times per day, and push notifications alone break focus more than 100 times daily. The brain never gets the chance to fully reset. Each alert functions like a city siren, fine if rare, but overwhelming when continuous. After a day of constant alarms, you find yourself drained without meaningful progress to show. Many people conclude this is an issue of motivation. In reality, it's structural. The group equilibrium has normalized interruption as the pace of work. Escaping that trap starts with recognizing its mechanics. The cycle doesn't continue because of laziness, but because each response validates someone else's instinct to keep checking. The system holds itself together through feedback loops. Breaking them can feel uncomfortable, but it's possible, especially when the changes are framed strategically rather than emotionally. One way forward is to create explicit interruption windows instead of implicit always-on availability. A team that acknowledges async rules, agreeing to reply same day rather than within minutes, introduces a new shared equilibrium that's actually more stable. This isn't just an abstract claim. Workplace studies have shown that leadership choices about culture and trust directly affect remote productivity. Managers who empowered teams with asynchronous norms consistently reported stronger outcomes than those who enforced constant check-ins. By easing the expectation of instant response, projects moved faster, not slower. That's the key. Leadership decisions establish the pace of equilibrium. A manager who verbally sets the rule that same-day responses are sufficient recalibrates the entire group rhythm. The fear of seeming out of the loop dissolves because everyone is now measured against the same frame. Some organizations have tested this deliberately, and the result was counterintuitive. Fewer interruptions led to sharper focus, deeper contributions, and projects finishing ahead of schedule. Leadership acted as the first player to shift, and once they held that line, the pattern stabilized in a better direction. For individuals, there's also a simple, actionable first step, a week one move. Set a personal reply window and state it clearly. I check messages twice a day, and I'll respond by end of day. Studies on management culture suggest that when employees shift communication to defined check-ins rather than scattered interruptions, measured output actually increases. The important detail is consistency. Once coworkers know you'll reply at predictable intervals, the pressure to demand real-time answers softens. What you gain back is the ability to string together extended focus blocks where meaningful, creative work finally gets done. Of course, choosing to pull back can still feel selfish in the moment. You'll wonder if colleagues feel ignored or if you've slowed the team. But look at the math in system-wide terms. 15 fragmented messages don't accelerate progress as much as one cohesive update. Micro-replies eat resources, consolidated answers enable direction. What seems like restraint on your end often saves time for everyone else downstream. The risk isn't in delaying a ping, it's in living fully inside the distraction equilibrium. That's the condition where teams trade genuine outcomes for the appearance of activity. Hours get consumed by toggling between tabs, producing the illusion of urgency but little accomplished work. And the longer it continues, the more the culture jokes about too many notifications while quietly accepting it as inevitable. That acceptance is what locks the equilibrium in place. The advantage, though, is that equilibriums are not permanent. Game theory highlights that once a group agrees, explicitly or through visible behavior, on a different standard, it becomes just as self-reinforcing as the old one. A team that adopts reply windows begins expecting delayed but concentrated answers. Meetings shrink because updates consolidate naturally. Focus expands because everyone has implicit permission to ignore the constant stream. The very same forces that kept everyone trapped can stabilize the group in a more productive state. So the next time your phone lights up, don't treat it as neutral. It's a link in a chain reacting through your whole group. By turning the sound off, checking later, or openly stating your rhythm, you stop feeding the cycle. And because the system is interdependent, even small shifts change how others frame their own actions. Breaking the equilibrium doesn't mean vanishing from communication. It means reshaping the rules so that responsiveness has weight and purpose instead of being reflex. Recognizing this isn't about one heroic individual outsmarting the system. It's about enough players joining to stabilize a rhythm that supports the work itself. Once groups see the costs quantified, not just in seconds, but in the lost hours of recovery time, they realize that communication speed has diminishing returns. The better strategy is not reacting faster, but reacting smarter. And when players internalize that, the shape of the game changes. Managing this shift requires courage at both the individual and leadership level, because it intentionally pushes against normal. But the gains are visible almost immediately. Conversations slow down yet produce more clarity, tasks finally cross the finish line, and busy days end with completed lists rather than exhausted stares. It's not about less connection, it's about reshaping connection so that it actually enables creation. When people grasp that their attention is entangled with others, the illusion of harmless pings breaks down. Decisions over when to engage or pause become not just personal preferences, but moves in the larger system. And recognizing that prepares you for another kind of collective challenge. The way coordination itself can flip from supportive to crushing when teams rely too heavily on constant meetings. That's the next layer. The coordination trap of remote work. You open your laptop at 9 in the morning, and by 5 your calendar is filled with back-to-back Zooms. But your actual task list, almost identical to where it started. The project you wanted to advance is still untouched, scattered into fragments between calls. Hours were spent in work mode, yet little real work moved forward. That's the essence of the coordination trap in remote and hybrid work. It feels productive because everyone is aligning, checking in, syncing schedules, confirming responsibilities. But alignment has become its own endless loop. Each meeting spawns another, fueled by the fear of missing something if you don't attend. The logistics of working together end up consuming the energy meant for the work itself. Hybrid work has made this cycle far more common. Managers, aiming for fairness, default to meetings as the shared ground where in-office and remote participants can interact. But here's the concrete evidence. About 40% of office interactions now include remote participants. A conversation that once happened casually by a desk morphs into a structured 30-minute call involving multiple screens. Small updates balloon into major scheduling commitments, multiplying interruptions across the week. The pattern is reinforced by good intentions. A manager thinks, if I hold daily check-ins, nothing will fall through the cracks. A team member thinks, if I attend every call, I won't get sidelined. A project lead thinks, if I invite the entire group, decisions will seem more legitimate. None of these choices are irrational on their own, but taken together, they create a paradox. The very mechanisms meant to ensure alignment drain away the capacity to actually execute. Companies are aware of the problem, and many have started adapting. Training for hybrid meetings has scaled up. Nearly half of employees reported they received such training by 2024. Leaders know there's inefficiency, but the sheer momentum of coordination has made it difficult to escape the default of one more call. That's why the transformation isn't just about awareness, it's about changing the operating rules. The numbers around remote productivity show why those rules matter. Remote workers often avoid office distractions like chatter or long commutes, but studies also reveal they report themselves as far less productive than in-office counterparts when working full-time from home. The culprit here isn't a lack of motivation. It's the gravity of overloaded calendars. Constant scheduling forces fragmented work and undermines focus. Progress slows because everyone spends more time talking about tasks than completing them. The trap also hides itself behind activity. A packed calendar, half a dozen calls, hours spent online. On the surface, it all suggests engagement. But the busyness creates an illusion of forward motion while unfinished tasks accumulate in the background. What's worse, once this pattern is normalized, people dismiss it as inevitable. That's just hybrid work. But traps persist only if people assume they can't be redesigned. One alternative is surprisingly simple. Shift to an async-first rule of engagement. Instead of defaulting to calls, use asynchronous updates as the baseline. Imagine Monday mornings where updates arrive in a shared document or short recorded video instead of a 1-hour meeting. Approvals happen in that same document within a set timeframe. Only unresolved debates or critical decisions escalate into a live call. This doesn't just clear calendars. It reshapes the rhythm of a week so actual work fills the space where meetings used to sit. Classical game theory explains why upfront rules like this matter more than individual discipline. If the rule is constant meetings, your day fills accordingly, no matter how much self-control you intend to exercise. If the rule establishes authority, who makes which decisions when feedback closes, how updates are logged, then the need to coordinate endlessly disappears. The structure creates stability. And the need for such rules is even clearer when you look across regions. By 2025, North American workers often lean toward hybrid, Europeans toward regular hybrid patterns, and Asia-Pacific regions lean heavily remote. That range of preferences means synchronous alignment is inefficient by default. Asynchronous practices level the playing field. The person in Los Angeles doesn't need a midnight meeting to sync with the colleague in London, and the manager in Mumbai doesn't lose hours tracking minor updates across impossible time zones. Each contribution slots into place without the pressure of shared real-time visibility. Of course, remote setups bring up another real issue: loneliness. Teams miss the human energy of in-person interactions, but the solution isn't blanket scheduling. It's being deliberate about what requires synchronous contact. Social connection and creative brainstorming benefit from live interaction. Routine updates and narrow approvals don't. The principle here isn't constant sync, it's selective sync. By reserving live time for moments of genuine interaction, the energy of collaboration returns without drowning people in meetings. It helps to picture a simple analogy. Think of a sports team. Players practice core skills individually, build fitness on their own schedules, and only come together for scrimmages or games that sharpen real coordination. Imagine if they spent every possible hour together monitoring even minor drills. Fatigue would rise while progress fell. Hybrid and remote teams need the same separation: independent focus by default, collective sync reserved for high-value interactions. And this matters for performance not just at the level of individuals, but at the group scale. Endless meetings don't just burn hours, they weaken every subsequent call. People fatigue, half-listen, nod along without absorbing points. That leads to repeat discussions later, creating yet another cycle of rescheduling. Recognizing this as a trap flips the narrative. It isn't communication that's draining momentum, but coordination taken too far. So how do you break free in practice? Teams that succeed tend to adopt one shared rule set and apply it consistently. A concrete week 1 test looks like this: make an Async default. Step 1, create a single shared document for recurring status updates. Step 2, reserve live meetings exclusively for key decisions that require real-time debate. Step 3, block out calendar sections called focus time and honor those blocks collectively. Teams that applied this model after hybrid training showed stronger outcomes, because the framework reduced wasted coordination while maintaining trust. At first, these steps can feel rigid or uncomfortable, but once established, they unlock more capacity for meaningful contributions from everyone. Less time is spent repeating, rescheduling, or multitasking with video calls running in the background. More time is spent moving projects forward with visible results. Structure makes efficiency rational, not risky. The next time your day fills edge to edge with coordination, stop and ask whether the hours added up to collaboration or only the impression of it. Because in the modern multiplayer environment, the teams that thrive aren't the ones glued to the most screens. They're the ones clear enough to change the rules of engagement. And once you see how rules shape outcomes at the group level, it becomes easier to recognize how a similar pattern applies in your own decisions, even in the small, everyday moments that feel purely personal. Procrastination isn't laziness, it's a stuck game. Everyday work struggles don't just come from group traps like overloaded Zoom schedules. Sometimes the real challenge happens in silence when no one else is in the room. That's where procrastination shows up, not as laziness, but as a stuck game you can't quite move past. You know, the standoff, hovering between opening the file and scrolling again, deciding whether to get up or hit snooze, promising the work will start in a minute, then watching the minutes multiply. That hesitation carries its own guilt. The task isn't the only weight, you also feel like you're betraying your own word. What stings isn't only the undone work, but the judgment that something must be wrong with your discipline. But procrastination doesn't signal weakness. It's the result of a system you've slipped into. Each pause seems logical when you zoom in, a short delay to feel fresher, a quick scroll to reset your brain, one video as a reward before effort. On their own, none of these choices seem disastrous. Added together, they stabilize into a loop where starting never quite arrives. Psychologists call this a procrastination equilibrium, where individually reasonable moves collect into an outcome no one intended, zero forward motion. At the center of this loop sits a bias in how the brain judges tasks. We tend to assign heavier weight to negatives than positives, something researchers describe as negative valence weighting. Finishing early, cutting stress, and earning relief all exist as potential positives, but the effort and discomfort take center stage. Filing taxes is the cliché example, not because the payoff isn't rewarding, but because the mind is fixated on the pain of paperwork rather than the relief of completion. Viewed through that lens, delay feels rational even when it is. Stress makes this worse. Picture your willpower like a battery, drained a little by every decision. Stress-heavy environments drain it faster. Low reserves make self-control brittle, so when you face a task, the easier option wins, not because it's better, but because the resistance feels overwhelming in that moment. Research on self-control shows that depleted attention and memory drive this effect. You want to move forward, but the resources that enforce discipline are offline. Procrastination in that state isn't laziness. It's exhaustion negotiating against effort. Digital habits compound the trap. Mindless swiping through short-form content conditions brains for bursts of novelty instead of sustained focus. When attention is trained in fragments, even small tasks feel heavier. Studies show that heavy short-form media use is associated with measurable challenges in working memory and a drop in sustained focus. One study found a reduction of roughly 27% in attention during tasks after repeated short video exposure. That means the next spreadsheet, or even organizing a folder, looks like a mountain because the brain has recalibrated away from maintaining effort. Delay again feels like the logical option. Thinking of procrastination as a stuck system helps explain why effort alone rarely breaks it. If one player moves differently in a group coordination trap, the trap continues because everyone else stays locked in. In procrastination, the group isn't coworkers. It's your chain of rational micro delays stabilizing into inertia. Noticing the pattern isn't enough. You need a move that alters the logic of the game. One reliable move is the micro commitment. The hardest part of any task is often the threshold, not the actual content. That report looks massive, but opening the document and typing a title doesn't. A quick example: set a timer for 25 minutes, open the file, and write one sentence. Compared against scrolling, that entry point is easy to justify. Once the first move is taken, momentum comes into play. Psychologists describe the Zeigarnik effect, where incomplete actions stay active in memory until they are resolved. Cross the starting line, and the brain nudges itself to continue. The domino doesn't fall until the first push, but once it falls, momentum helps the rest. Another tested approach is recalibration training. In controlled studies, participants who practiced reweighting pros and cons of outcomes, learning to see immediate positives as equal to or stronger than immediate negatives, showed reduced procrastination. One version of this training, developed as a simple feedback game, helped participants catch themselves when they exaggerated the pain of effort while downplaying even tiny rewards of action. The good news is you don't need a lab setup to try the principle. You can use a pared-down version. Before a dreaded task, list one clear short-term benefit you'll get within minutes of starting. It could be relief, closure, or even just momentum. Naming that immediate positive interrupts the bias that holds delay in place. These strategies matter because they reset the board. If the procrastination equilibrium is stabilized by false rationality, then micro-commitments and bias recalibration provide new rules where starting looks like the better move. One breaks the task into something too small to resist, and the other reframes the mental calculus so positives get enough space to compete. Together, they alter the balance that kept you stuck, offering ways to destabilize the trap without waiting for perfect motivation. It's worth noting that stress management loops back into this picture. Because stress depletes cognitive reserve, eliminating it becomes a form of preemptive defense. Sleep, physical activity, and small recovery rituals don't spark action by themselves, but they raise the baseline willpower battery that makes micro-commitments easier to deploy. Managing stress doesn't just protect health, it creates the conditions where simple strategies actually have the power to work. When you add these approaches together, procrastination reduces its power. Recognize the weighting bias that amplifies negatives. Apply a micro-commitment to shrink the startup cost. Highlight one immediate benefit to rebalance the equation. Protect the willpower battery by reducing ongoing stress. Combine them, and the system shifts from stable inertia to a state where forward motion is easier to sustain. That shift is subtle, but it's important. Procrastination is not proof you're incapable, but evidence you've been inside a structural pattern that made delay the default. Once you tweak the rules, the cycle of hesitation no longer feels inevitable. The same mental machinery that created delay can be turned towards steady motion once it's given new conditions to operate under. And when you begin seeing procrastination as a system you can rewire, a bigger question opens up. If individual strategies like micro-commitments and recalibration can shift personal outcomes, what happens when you identify the larger moves in life that guarantee progress no matter how others behave? That's the next challenge, finding actions so strong they reshape the board regardless of outside responses.